Welcome to your long-range plan. My name is John Kennan. I'm an attorney. I practice specialized, that is, in estate planning law, along with my colleague, co-host Paul Tierney. Paul, if you'd like to say hello, reintroduce yourself again.
Hello, everybody. I'm Paul Tierney. I'm an attorney in Quincy and in Sandwich, and concentrating in elder law and estate planning. And today we want to talk a little bit about a case I came across recently, and I think a lot of people are in this situation, and I think you find it interesting, some of the things that we go through and that families go through, and it's good to know that you're not alone when you come across these issues. This particular situation had to do with a married couple who one of the wife in this relationship, the kids are all grown, married couple in their late 70s, but the wife was getting to the point where she was immobile and could not really transfer getting to the bed, to getting dressed, or to the bathroom. Had trouble being able to care for herself, and what the family went through dealing with this particular situation. So it's interesting in that there's many people out there that have similar experiences, but when you're going through that, you think you're all alone and that this is just happening to you. But it's important to know that no, this is pretty regular, and it happens to a lot of people. So your best bet is to get some advice, and we're going to talk about the various things that happen in this particular situation and what the family's going through.
Thanks, Paul. I have experienced personally what we're about to talk about, with my late father, and you, I believe, with your late father as
Yes.
well.
Mm-hmm.
But the theme that's going to run through this discussion is what do we do? What does someone do? What does a family do when they have a loved one that becomes sick, as you said, becomes immobile, and wants to be cared for at home, and the loved ones also want to care for that individual at home. And then I think we still have to talk about the caregiver. Mm-hmm. We have someone that's not well, tragic enough as it is, but oftentimes people forget about the caregivers and the toll it takes on them. And if you want to expand on that a little bit, and
Sure.
some examples of how to counsel,
Mm-hmm.
what we do to counsel our clients.
Mm-hmm. Well, first of all, every situation is unique and different, and I do encourage people, families, if they want to try to care for their loved one at home, that they, try to do so. In the situation that I'm involved with, it got to the point where the family had an up and downstairs home, typical, and upstairs, downstairs, mm-hmm. bedrooms upstairs, bathroom, I believe, was upstairs. But it got to the point where the family knew that it would be in their best interest if they downsized mm-hmm. and made life a lot easier and simpler for them, especially where the wife was in the situation where she had trouble transferring. Mm-hmm. So they sold their family house and they moved into a condominium where everything was all on one floor, figuring that would be much better and easier for the invalid spouse, we'll mm-hmm. call her, to be able to get around and to deal with still being able to stay at home. So that's what they did. And again, I encourage families, we don't have a crystal ball, we don't know exactly what's going to happen, mm-hmm. But to try their best, realizing that circumstances can change. And as they change, you have to be ready and willing to just say, hey, this isn't going to be a situation that's going to stay constant. You may have to take other measures. You may have to develop other plans for dealing with your loved one at home. Mm-hmm. It may get to the point where they can't be at home anymore. So I try to counsel them and say, try your best with what you can do now, and then get to run with that for as long as you can. Mm-hmm. You may have to change. Mm-hmm. And that's exactly what happened in the situation that I'm about to talk about.
So, as a potential caregiver, like you and I did for our own fathers, you assist as quickly as you can, but with the understanding that as best as you can, and the duration could be anywhere from a week, a month, a year, we don't know.
Yeah, that's
We
what I
don't know.
try to tell my clients. If you are in a position to try to care for your loved one at home, then you just do the best you can. Usually, you probably need some outside assistance, whether that be other family members or some type of a caregiver that can assist with transferring the elder, from the bed, getting them dressed, or maybe from a wheelchair into the bathroom. That's something that you have to deal with on an ongoing basis until you reach the point where maybe that can't be dealt with anymore. But usually the other spouse will need some assistance, and they have caregivers that you can hire typically by the hour, and that's usually something that you'd want to look into if you're going to try to care for your loved one at home.
That certainly benefits the individual that's ill, but really relieves the caregiver too. There's relief to the caregiver.
Well, again, I think it's important to know that caregivers should not try to do it all themselves.
Right.
Maybe in the beginning they can do it all themselves, but
Right.
typically I see it gets to the point where you need other assistance.
It's overwhelming.
It can be overwhelming. So again, if they're willing to try it, they should do it with an open mind, knowing that the situation could change and it could get to the point where it's not feasible anymore. So if there's other family members that are willing to come in and help out and to give the caregiver spouse some relief, I think that's very, very important. Because what you don't want to have happen, and I see this too often, is that the caregiver spouse gets overwhelmed because they're there 24 hours a day. And sometimes even if they do have caregivers come in, maybe paid caregivers for 2 or 4 hours a day, I mean, they're still dealing with their spouse at night. And a lot of times the spouse, needs some attention at night. And that can be weary. And you don't want to get to the point where the caregiver spouse is just getting so overwhelmed that they get sick. Because that's probably the worst situation if you have both spouses sick. The one spouse that needs the long-term care, and then the other supposedly healthy spouse getting to the point where they're run down and they then need long-term care.
I had a case like that, Paul, some years ago, and I was asked by the family, these daughters, the sons and daughters, to meet with them in the elder's home to talk about the care that the father needed. And lo and behold, I knew going in, which we're talking about now, that not enough attention was being paid to the wife, the elder, who was caring for her sick husband. She was not steady on her feet. You could see she was just so tired and so sickly from this, and easy not to pick up on that because of the dynamics of the situation. And at the end of the evening, I recommended to the family, we have to put a plan together. Your mother's going to be needing care herself if this continues. She can't be taking care of your father, her husband.
So
alone.
John, I hear that you're saying that you didn't think that the children picked up on it, that the mother was
and that
kind
happens,
of failing?
And that happens. Yeah. And the dynamics of a family is such that some people don't want to contribute their time, not because they don't love their parent. It's maybe they're apprehensive, they're afraid. In my particular case, probably like yours, you're all of a sudden managing numerous so much medication, so much dosage in terms of the different medicines, 30, 40 pills a day, whatever. That's just that component, let alone having to physically move a parent around and so forth. So I think some people are just apprehensive. They can't invest themselves in that. It's overwhelming for them. Not that they don't love their parent, it's just too much. Then another sibling might say, well, how come you're not helping? We're trying to help. And where I'm going with this is what happens in a situation where there's some friction amongst the siblings, but sometimes and oftentimes between a husband and wife, where the sick individual, let's say the wife in this case, feels abandoned when her husband says, I can't take care of you, honey, anymore. Here, we have to do something else. And there's that little bit of that angst.
Well, it's interesting because that's the exact situation I'm running into now. Family situation is the husband and the wife is the one who needs the long-term care. The husband's beside himself because he's getting worn out. He can't really care for her anymore. The doctor is saying that the wife needs to go to a long-term care facility. The social workers are saying the same thing. It's a hard situation because the sick spouse is feeling abandoned. They're talking about it, but she's not ready to accept that. And what do you do in a situation like that? I try to counsel my clients that are involved in those situations that, hey, if this is what the doctor is saying, he's an independent professional. You have to go by that person's advice. It's not one spouse trying to do the other by shipping them off to a nursing home. If it gets to the point where the doctor and the social worker are saying this needs to be done, then the sick spouse has to be convinced in a nice way. I try to say to the family, blame the doctor. Not blame the doctor, but hey, if the doctor is giving that type of advice, they're the professional. They recognize these situations. They know what's best for the individual. It's understandable that the sick spouse is apprehensive about going to a long-term care facility. That's a scary thought, especially many of us have been in our homes for 20, 30 years. And the thought of having to leave our home and maybe never come back again, that has to be terrifying. And understandably so. But I think if you can counsel these individuals by letting them know that, hey, the other spouse, the other family members can visit whenever you want. There's people going to be in the facility 24 hours a day to be able to transfer you, to be able to care for you, to be able to meet your needs. Then that might be a way to try to comfort them. But in my experience, they're very scared. They're very apprehensive. They don't know what to think. It's just an overwhelming situation and very stressful whenever you have to move, never mind move out of your home to a long-term care facility. But having said that, what I've seen many, many times in the past, I've experienced it with my own, in-laws, I've experienced with some other family members, is that once the elder has moved to a long-term care facility, it might take them a couple of days, it might take them a couple of weeks, but they do get used to it, they do get comfortable, and actually they start to thrive.
We're just going to use the same word. They do begin to thrive. Again, I keep using my own personal situation as an example, but when my father became very ill, he fought me tooth and nail, as they say. It was horrific. And although I kept saying, Dad, it's in your best interest, it's in all our best interest, because, my sister and I were just two children in the family. We're not medical providers. We were not able to provide my father with the kind of care he needed. My father intellectually knew that. But as you said, 40 years living in his home, his own boss, with his own idiosyncrasies about what he does during the day, when and when he wants to. That's the key here.
Right.
They lose their self-worth in a lot of cases.
Right.
Because now they become wholly dependent on others. But once he was, I hate to say placed, but once he became used to the assisted living facility that he ultimately ended up in, he started building some friendships and met some guys and gals that were from the same neighborhood in Boston. And to make a long story short, he was receiving the care he needed, but socially he started to thrive. For the short time he had left, it was more dignified than it could have been.
Right. Yeah, and I think that's important to try to stress to our clients who are going through situations like that, is that in the end, they're much better off because there's going to be people there all the time. Even socialization, you're right. A lot of times the elders find out that, hey, they're not the only one in the situation. And you can feel isolated if you're going through that at your own home just by yourself. But if you're in a long-term care facility and you see that there's 8 or 10 other people in a similar situation to yours, then you don't feel as isolated, and you actually have something in common. So there's great socialization that occurs with elders in those situations. But again, I try to stress to the family, if this is what the doctor is recommending, then don't take it personally if the other spouse is all upset or calling you names or using everything in their power to try to convince you to keep them home. Because it becomes untenable, and the risk is that the caregiver spouse is going to get sick and end up dead. And then that's a worse situation.
Yeah, it is. If we could segue into some of the material we've talked about in the past, some, we'll call these, for this particular show, financial concerns as they relate to this scenario. If you could talk to us about the healthcare proxy, I mean, such an important document, the durable power of attorney. We've kind of defined those documents, but let's talk about them as they apply to this particular situation.
Well, whenever anybody is hospitalized or going into a long-term care facility, they want to make sure that you have a healthcare proxy in place. They want it. They ask for it. They want that part of the medical records at the facility. Because again, if there's medical decisions that have to be made, they'll ask the elder, as long as they're competent enough to make their own medical decision, but they need to have the proxies or the agents listed in that legal document. The Massachusetts healthcare proxy. That gives legal authority for choice number 1 or choice number 2 to make a medical decision for the elder if one has to be made. Many times when we're dealing with long-term care facilities, something can happen to the elder. They may get sick and they may have to be rushed to the hospital. Well, even getting elders admitted to the hospital, if they're unconscious or they don't know what's happening, they need somebody with the authority to do that. And that's where the healthcare proxy is a key legal document that should be part of everybody's estate plan. So that's one of the documents that, yes, should be in place.
And updated too. More often than not, I'm reviewing estate plan documents that include healthcare proxies, and they were drafted by folks that we learned from years ago, and they don't have the HIPAA language in the healthcare proxy, which is so important, as well as all this other language about antipsychotic medicines and healthcare facilities, institutions. The point is, if you've got a healthcare proxy and it's not current, probably what do you think, in the past 10 years, 6 years?
Yeah, probably even 4 or 5 years.
Yeah.
It probably behooves you to get it updated.
Get a review.
John, that was interesting. You mentioned antipsychotic medications. I try to put that in all of my healthcare proxies and in my durable powers of attorney too, which is more for legal and financial matters. But what happens is if an elder has to take antipsychotic medications, and if they don't understand why they have to take it, then a special guardianship needs to be brought, called the Rogers guardianship. And that's where you have to get court approval for the administration of these very powerful medications, antipsychotic medications. But if you have authority in your documents to administer those, then you don't need to go to court to get this Rogers type of guardianship in place.
And that particular situation is trying enough as it is. So let's not complicate it or allow it to be complicated by having to seek intervention of the court with a petition for a guardianship, for the administration of this type of medicine, or the ability for a medical provider to make that medicine available. So with the right language in place and the durable power of attorney and or healthcare proxy, you can short circuit that tedious, again, rather overwhelming process.
Yeah, and I think, John, we've talked about this many times. We actually like to stay out of court with our clients. And if you do the proper planning, there usually is no need to go to court. And again, with those two documents, healthcare proxy, power of attorney, part of everybody's base estate plan, and should definitely be looked into and make sure that you have them. And if it's been a while since those have been looked at, it probably makes sense to get them updated. Again, we run into it with banks sometimes. If we're dealing with a durable power of attorney that gives somebody the authority to pay somebody's bills, for instance, if that power of attorney is more than a few years old, banks many times are reluctant to allow it to be effective. Many times I'm on the phone with the bank or with bank's counsel saying, hey, this is the situation. Yes, it was signed years ago, but we really need this to be effective because the elder's not in a position to sign another one. So again, to avoid that type of a situation, I think it behooves all of us to make sure that these documents are updated periodically, at least every 3 or 4 years. I think that makes sense.
All right. You and I have talked about the healthcare proxy, the durable power of attorney, wills with testamentary trusts, all those things. But to be consistent with this particular topic today, while the individuals are alive, they can avail themselves of the value of the durable power of attorney and healthcare proxy. But what about talking about long-term care insurance right now? Could we hear from you on long-term care insurance? Another vehicle or something else that's available to people that sometimes they put in place early on, or never, or at some point when folks like us talk to them?
Well, again, I think we should do a whole separate show on long-term care insurance. And again, the time to go get that is not when you're entering the nursing home or the assisted living facility, because chances are you can't get it at that point. You have to get it when you're young enough, when you're healthy enough, when it makes sense financially. So I do encourage people to check that out. It should be, again, part of, I think, everybody's estate plan. You may not get it, but you should check it out to see how much it would cost based on your facts and circumstances. Sometimes you can't get it, but I'd rather have you know that now than be in a situation later on where you think you can get it and there's no way that you can get it. Because that would definitely have you doing some other type of planning if you couldn't get that in place. But yeah, we should do a whole show on long-term care insurance and some of the nuances and when and how and what to expect for premium payments and things like that based on your age and health. But that is a serious concern I think that everybody should look into at some point in their lives.
Because it can be too late. For instance, the scenario you've already outlined in this particular case where we're talking about caregivers, the inevitability of going into assisted living and so forth, this is not the right time to be exploring long-term care.
Usually it's too late at that point. You're probably uninsurable. So again, you don't want to go scrambling around only to be disappointed. You do that when you're not under the gun, so to speak, in a health crisis. You do that, when you can plan it, when you can take your time, when you're healthy enough, or you think you're healthy enough, that's when to explore it. But like all of this planning, I think it's important to get yourself educated. John and I offer workshops twice a month. It's part of our planning process. We don't do this for marketing. We do it for our existing clients and for people who want to become clients. We first tell them, hey, come to the workshop. Find out, what's out there, the 15 different things that you should know about. And then I think we can have a better meeting after that. Because too often we have people who just, think that they want to do something simple. They come in and they think by having a simple will in place that's going to protect the house from the nursing home. And again, this gets into, no, people need to be educated as to what's out there, what are some of the rules, what are some of the laws. Not that we want to make you attorneys or estate planning experts, but I think it's important that everybody be aware of what's out there, just knowing a heck of a lot more about what their estate plan could be as opposed to what they think it is without any input from us. So again, it's more efficient when you're doing estate planning from our perspective if clients can be educated first, and then we can see them, and based on that little education that we give them, we compare what they want to what their existing plan is or their existing situation, and then we can best steer them in the right direction for completing their own estate plan.
Let's talk about something briefly. We have a few moments, probably a few minutes left, but talk to me and talk to us about preparing for the healthy spouse. We've talked about the spouse that's ill, that needs the care, but there is planning, present day planning for the healthy spouse. And I know we could devote a whole show to that, and we will, but just if you could, let's talk about some suggestions for a healthy spouse to consider too at this time.
So you mean a spouse that's not healthy and a spouse that is healthy?
Yes.
Well, there's a couple of different ways that you can go. One is if you have an ill spouse, if that ill spouse needs long-term care, then the thought is to try to get that ill spouse qualified for Mass Health or Medicaid as soon as possible. Now, to qualify for Medicaid, you have to be under $2,000 in assets, so that means shifting assets over to the healthy spouse. So usually you want to plan for the sick spouse first, obtain Medicaid eligibility, then you can do some more maybe aggressive planning or more detailed planning for the healthy spouse. But if you're dealing with a crisis situation, in other words, somebody's about to enter the nursing home, then you have to plan on just the institutionalized spouse first. You got to get that planning done first before you can then worry about the healthy spouse. But I think, again, you're right. We could devote many hours to discussing the different types of plans that are out there, and we will as we go through and have future shows. But I think for today, I think we've covered all we can in our allotted time, so we look forward to exploring this in the future and devoting more time to your future planning.
Thanks, Paul. As always, it's been enjoyable and a learning experience for me too. We talk to one another on a regular basis. We bounce ideas, examples off of one another. We're always looking for input. And with that, thank you for tuning in to Your Long Range Plan. Again, my name is John Kennan. I have an office here in Sandwich and see clients in Quincy. And Paul Tierney, my co-host, practices here in Sandwich and Quincy as well. And don't forget to look us up regarding our workshops. We do offer them twice a month. And thank you. See you next time.